Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Township of Georgian Bay Planning Council meeting for Wednesday, October 13th. It's now 9:03, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. In the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories they traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place, the land, the water, the sky, and all that live on it, in it, and above it. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this place and who continue to care for it. And we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our decisions and our actions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take actions towards real truth and reconciliation. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or code of conduct conflicts? I don't know why I keep messing that part up. Not seeing anyone raise their hands, so I'll assume there is not any declarations. And I have moved by Councillor Bocek, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved that Council adopts the planning agenda of October 13th, 2021 as circulated. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. So now we're going to go to a public meeting held under the authority of the Planning Act. This morning, there is a public meeting scheduled for two proposed zoning bylaw amendments. I will briefly summarize the procedures to be utilized for the meeting. First, the clerk will advise council as to when, how, and to whom the notice of public meeting was circulated for the proposed amendments being considered. The clerk will also advise of the appeal procedures. Next, staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the bylaws to provide any other information that is relevant to the applications, and the clerk will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the public will have an opportunity to provide comments on the amendments being considered. Please be respectful of the time and be concise with your comments. All commentators are requested to state their name and address. After the public discussion, the public meeting will be closed. Council will then have an opportunity to provide comments for clarification. I now declare this meeting to be a public meeting pursuant to Section 43 of the Planning Act to deal with the following proposed amendments. Z21-12 for Carosa and Z21-13. The Township of Georgian Bay housekeeping. To our clerk.
Notice of the public meeting was sent by first-class mail to the respective owners and assessed persons within 120 to 800 meters of the property subject to the proposed applications, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the applications. These notices were sent at least 30 days prior to today's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed applications and a key map showing the location of the properties on the description of the lands to be affected by the proposed amendments. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were all provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Township of Georgian Bay official plan. Members of the public are advised at this point that unless they make an oral or written submission to council before council makes a decision on these applications, that any subsequent appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal may be dismissed by the tribunal. Anyone who wishes to be notified of council's decision respecting the proposed zoning bylaw amendments must submit a written request to the planning department.
Thank you. So our first item under this is the zoning bylaw amendment application Z21-12 for Carosa, which is 10 Fern Avenue, Mactier. And to our planner, Mr. Oster.
Good morning, Council. I'm just going to bring up the presentation here. Get a thumbs up if the slideshow's there. Perfect.
We can see it. Thank you.
All right, so our first public meeting this morning is for zoning bylaw amendment Z21-12 for 10 Fern Avenue in MacTier. Here we have a overview location map showing the subject property, shown here in gray. It is located on Fern Avenue, kind of in the northern part of MacTier. And the 2018 aerial imagery. So as you can see here, the lands are currently vacant, and the approximate property boundaries are shown here in red. So a quick policy framework overview. The lands are considered to be a settlement area within the context of the provincial policy statement. The lands are designated as an urban center within the district official plan. They're also designated an urban center within the township official plan and are further designated as residential within that urban center. And presently the lands are zoned residential type 3 in the township zoning bylaw. So the purpose and effect of this application is to rezone the lands to a site-specific residential type 4 exception zone to permit the construction of a single detached dwelling with a reduced setback of 20 meters to the rail right-of-way. The zoning bylaw currently requires that any building that contains habitable space or to be used for human habitation are to be set back 30 meters to a rail right-of-way. So here we have the survey and the site plan that was provided by the applicant. This portion of it here shows the subject lands located here with the proposed dwelling in this area, and the setback from the dwelling to the rear property line of 20 meters. The applicant has also indicated where the rail line is back here. Now, although the actual dwelling is set back significantly more than 30 meters to the physical rail line themselves, the setback of 30 meters is measured to the mutual property line, which is located here. And that is for in case of rail expansion in the future. So as such, the setback of 20 meters is requested to this property line here. So we did receive some comments, 2 comments, one from the district saying that they would recommend that a decision on the above noted application be deferred pending the submission of a noise and vibration study or a development viability study to the satisfaction of the township and the Canadian Pacific Railway. The Canadian Pacific Railway also commented and saying that they are generally not in favor of residential uses that are not compatible with the rail operations. Due to their 24/7 schedule and varying schedules and volumes on those rail lines. Their approach to development within the vicinity of rail lines is identified through the recommended guidelines, which were provided to staff from the rail line. And those guidelines essentially state that a 30-meter setback is recommended for residential uses to the rail lands. So the application process here, just a quick overview of where we are. We're located here at the public meeting stage where an information report is presented to council and opportunities for the public, council, and any agencies to comment on the application. So the recommendation from staff right now is to receive the report and that any of the comments that were received be considered, and that once those comments have been addressed, that a recommendation report would return to council. The Canadian Pacific Railway's comments related to the 30-meter setback are what their minimum standards or what their recommendations are. They do have some guidelines that they've prepared that essentially state where the 30-meter setback is not possible through the preparation of a development viability assessment, which would take into account things such as hazard analysis, construction issues, safety controls, and incident management. All of those things are taken into consideration in consultation with CP Rail to make recommendations for mitigation measures to reduce the impacts of the proximity of the rail line through the development of the property. So staff are recommending that once that document is prepared, that the application would then come back to council for a decision. So that is all I have for the presentation. The applicant's agent, Marissa Handley from Skelton Bromwell and Associates, is in attendance this morning and does have a presentation that they would like to make to council as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. To our clerk, Mr. Oster made reference to a couple of pieces of correspondence. Has any other correspondence been received?
Just the 2 letters. So one letter of support of deferral was received from the District of Muskoka pending completion of a noise and vibration impact study or development viability study to the satisfaction of the Township of Georgian Bay and the Canadian Pacific Railway. And one letter of correspondence was received from CPR requesting that the recommended guidelines, including all recommended setbacks, are followed.
All right, thank you. So of course, my next question is, are there any members of the public who wish to comment? And I understand from Mr. Oster that there is a presentation that has been prepared by the applicant's agent.
Yes,
So perhaps we should do that.
Yeah, I just permitted Ms. Handley. And I do not see the applicant's name present, so perhaps she's here on their behalf.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Ms. Handley. Welcome.
Yeah, the applicant is not present. But is it okay if I share my screen? Okay. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Marissa, could you go to full screen on your document? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, Your Worship and Council. My name is Marissa Handley, and I am a planner at SBA. I will be presenting a zoning bylaw amendment application for the lands located at 10 Fern Avenue, Mactier, in the Township of Georgian Bay on behalf of our client, Mr. Carroza. The property is approximately 0.0 hectares in size. The property has frontage of approximately 20 meters on Fern Avenue and a depth of approximately 41.69 meters. The property is currently vacant. The proposed dwelling will be a single-story dwelling with 130.37 meters squared of ground floor area with a 46 meter squared covered back patio and 5.25 meters covered front patio. There'll be a picture of the dwelling later on in the presentation as well. The lands located in the settlement area of Mactier and are surrounded by residential properties to the north, southwest, and east is a rail right-of-way. Zoning bylaw application has been requested to rezone the lands located at 10 Fern Avenue from the current R3 zone to the proposed R4 zone with an exception to section 4.29 to allow for the distance of the rail right-of-way to be 20 meters instead of the required 30 meters in the Township of Georgian Bay zoning bylaw. Furthermore, we acknowledge that there is a lot boundary issue with the current dwelling located at the neighboring property. It's intended that this issue will be dealt with on a separate application if requested by the municipality. And there's also a shed on the railway right-of-way that has presumably been there for many years. So it is the owner's intention to demolish this shed. This is also a photo of what the house would look like here on the right. And if you see on the left, this is the house that I was just talking about that sort of encroaches on to Mr. Crow's property, as well as the shed back here. So we did receive the comments from the Canadian Pacific Railway, who are not in favor of residential uses that are not compatible with rail operations, and that any new development proceed in accordance with their recommended guidelines. So their guidelines do offer some relief for properties within settlement areas and where the setbacks are not possible. So if the municipality agrees to allow for construction of the dwelling, we will work with the municipality owner and engineers to maintain applicable guidelines such as the development viability assessment if required, like Brad had mentioned in his presentation. So the zoning bylaw is consistent and conform with the provincial policy statement, District of Muskoka official plan, the Township official plan, and the development complies with the provisions of R4 zone in the Township of Georgian Bay zoning bylaw and is consistent with adjacent properties, as well as maintains the residential and rural character of MacTier. Additionally, the setback of the railway is compatible and is actually reduced from surrounding residential dwellings. To ensure no harm comes to the 20-meter setback of the railway, the guidelines will be taken into consideration. Thank you for allowing me to make a presentation this morning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. If you could stop, there we go. Thank you very you anticipated my next request. Ms. Way, I understand that the applicant is present, and I don't know if there's any members of the public who are present who would like to make additional comments before we turn it over to council.
I've promoted Mr. Croza to panelist, but he needs to accept the invite to be moved in. But I believe that is the only person present for this application other than Ms. Hanley.
Okay. Well, then with that, if we'll turn it over to the council, and I am ready to recognize anybody who puts their hand up. Councilor Yanko, please, followed by Councilor Douglas.
I think this is a fairly simple application. It sounds like the CPR doesn't want anything built there because of the closeness to the rails. This home is being built, what, 7.5 meters from the road, so they're closer to the road than there are the neighbors on either side. I don't think there's any benefit for doing any vibration studies. I think that's a waste of money. This is the vacant lot. They want to build as far away from the tracks as possible, closest to the road as possible. I have no actual problem approving this today. I don't think we need to waste their money on a vibration study. I don't think CPR is going to accept it anyway. And I think we just go forward in approving it today. That's my position.
Thank you. Councilor Douglas.
Yeah, I echo some of the same things that Councilor Bianco says. I think that a vibration test is a bit of a waste, and I'd be prepared to move this forward today if it's the will of council. The only thing I did have a question for the planner is I see the house next door encroaches over the property line. Just out of curiosity, how is that dealt with? I presume that the owner is not contesting that, but does it need to be sorted out before this gets the permit, or?
Mr. Oster, you want to respond to that, or Mr. Espilla?
Mr. Oster probably knows. Brad?
I can answer that, but I see that Mr. Espilla has turned on his camera. I don't know if he wants to add to the conversation here.
Brad, you can continue on this question. I'll let something to add at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Yeah, so the encroachment of the existing dwelling on the neighboring lot is more of a civil matter. When staff were on site and did the site visit, it appears that it's more of like a covered porch on that side of the dwelling, like an enclosed entrance that encroaches. So if the applicants wanted, they can, work through and do a consent application to potentially sever a small portion of land from this property to add to the adjoining lands to correct the encroachment. But at this point, it is more of a civil matter, that encroachment.
Okay, thank you for that, Brad.
Thank you. Any other councilors? Councilor Bocheck, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have any problems with this application whatsoever. It's development where development belongs. The neighboring houses are equal distance from the rear setback on the property line. With the housing shortage and the feasibility of getting housing these days, I think we're going to have to look at cases like this and say if they're willing to put up with the train noise and CP is willing to sign off on it, then let them go ahead. It's really, I don't have any issues with it whatsoever.
Thank you. Councilor Jarvis.
I'm curious, through our planner, Brad, there are other houses obviously already on that street. Are any of them relatively recent, or have they all been well established, been there a long time? Do we know?
Through the mayor to Councilor Jarvis, most of the houses that are there have been there for some time. So the 30-meter setback may not have applied to the development or the construction of the existing dwellings in the area.
Okay, you answered both questions I had. Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Ranko, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up something that Brian just mentioned. Brad, is there any reason why we can't approve this today? Brian mentioned that we had to get CPR to approve it. We don't have to get anybody to approve this beside council, is it? Can this be approved today? Is there anything stopping us from doing it?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Espilla.
Thank you, Mayor Coutier. Regarding the process for this particular application, the proposed development is adjacent to one of the two transcontinental railroads in Canada. And my advice to council for this matter is to pursue the development viability analysis before proceeding. It's in the municipality's interest to ensure that we have our I's dotted and T's crossed on an application like this adjacent to a major transportation corridor, and to ensure that any appropriate mitigation measures are in place so that we as a municipality reduce our exposure to potential liability down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll read the resolution, just so everybody has it in mind. I have moved by Councillor Douglas, seconded by Councillor Hazelton. Be it resolved that the Development Service Report 2021-74 dated October 13th, 2021, with respect to zoning bylaw amendment application Z21-12 be received. And that staff be directed to consider the comments received for Z21-12 for 10 Fern Avenue, Mactier, and prepare a recommendation report and a bylaw that will be brought back to a subsequent council meeting for consideration. Are there any further comments? Councillor Wienko.
I would still like to get this, get the opinion of the council about approving this today. I just can't see wasting money on a vibration study or whatever they want to do. I don't know how much they cost. Maybe you can give me an idea what it costs, but I don't think it's going to add anything to it. I think we need to, we could approve it today and maybe put some wording in the approval that we're not responsible or whatever, or about future problems with vibration or whatever. But I just can't see putting people through unnecessary loops and waiting another month or two before they get their approval. I don't know what other councillors think, but I would like to propose that we move forward on this and see if we can get other people to agree.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm wondering if Brad could interpret the answer that we got from Christopher. I had trouble hearing Christopher this morning and it was a bit garbled. So I think the advice I heard was that we need to have our ducks lined up before we approve this. So Brad, could you sort of, I see the thumbs up, right? Thank you for that. Is there anything more to that? Did I miss something? What ducks are you referring to, Christopher or Brad? Thank you.
Can we hear me okay? No, can't hear. Oh,
We have to work at it.
okay. Basically, can you hear me at all?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Coots here. My recommendation, administration's recommendation, is that prior to this application proceeding, that the applicant prepare the development viability assessment, analysis study, whatever the term is that we're going to use for this, to identify any issues associated with the railway activity. This is not, we're not talking about a minor railway line here. We are talking about one of the two transcontinental railroad corridors in Canada. So there is substantial activity. I want to make sure it's our obligation as a municipality that we look out for our residents, the people who are developing, and our industrial partners, and all of the other partners that we have. So we have to look at this holistically. So we want to make sure that this development is sound and that any mitigation measures that need to be implemented for this are in place. It's our obligation to everybody in the township of Georgian Bay.
Mayor, if I could just follow up with that, please. Just to say that I want to support what our Director of Planning has said here, that we need to have our ducks lined up, and we don't fully have that at the moment. So I would think it'd be best if this came back. And I think, is that your recommendation, Brad, as well? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that while I agree with Councillor Wienko that, you know, given that there's development on either side and the development on either side is closer to the railway, I don't have any, let me call it, subjective reasons to say don't develop, but I do respect the fact that we need the full acknowledgement of the resident of what they're getting themselves into and whatever mitigation that the rail line may recommend. Because we don't want a situation where they develop something and then their foundation cracks a few years later and they want the township to help repair it. So I think that my personal opinion on this is that we pass the resolution as drafted, as proposed. I mean, I think it's very clear to the applicant, and that we as a council don't have objections to them developing the property. We just want to make sure it's developed appropriately. And I noticed that just immediately now in the chat that the applicant is willing to take on risks and hold the township harmless, which we definitely appreciate. But I think that we have to respect the process, including the fact that they neighbor on a busy railway that has recommendations and requirements. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly like the caution that Christopher has provided here. But I also have a little concern here, and that is frequently we ask for engineering reports, but we don't have any engineer on staff to interpret and fully understand those reports. And so I'm not sure that it really puts us in a better place than say the applicant telling us that we're off the hook for those matters, which is really what we want to be in the first place. So if the applicant were to provide us with a document or a statement that releases us from any obligations, it might relate to vibration issues, etc., then I would think that that gets us to the same place as an engineering study, which we don't have the expertise to review, unless we're going to contract out with an engineer and send it out for peer review. So I like simple. And as I say, since we're not staffed to handle the complex, then is there a path forward with simple? Thank you.
Councillor Wojcik.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Mactier. This isn't Aurora or London or downtown Toronto. This is Mactier. It's a vacant lot. Houses next door are built in the same area. I don't get it. I never get it with this planning stuff. So if it's the demand of our staff to be cautious and get a letter from their lawyer saying that we're not liable for any damage because of the railway, I guess that's fine. But man, do we complicate things. It's a simple house build in Mactier. I don't even know why it's coming to council. I think our planning staff should have the ability to move forward with something like this, but I'll vote to approve the resolution that's there today, but we got to look at easier ways of doing things. This is ridiculous. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Rienko.
Is there a way that with our approval today, we can direct staff to provide all the permitting processes automatically once the applicable studies have been done without it coming back to us?
Through the mayor to Councillor Jarvis, if council staff don't have the ability to approve a bylaw, so in order for the amending bylaw to be passed, that does have to be a decision of council.
Okay. Appreciate the clarification.
Councillor Rienko.
I guess my question is to Brad. In your presentation, I got the feeling that CPR was adamant about not having this built. Am I wrong? If we did do a vibration study or whatever, would the CPR actually accept it, or they're pretty adamant that they're not going to accept anything and that nothing should be built there? Like, are we wasting our money trying to convince them that this should be built? I wasn't quite sure that they would be approve anything.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bianco. CP commented that they generally don't support the establishment of new residential uses adjacent to rail lands. However, where the municipality has determined that the lands are most appropriately used for residential purposes, which through the official plan, the township has designated these lands as residential. There is this process to go through being the development viability analysis, where that 30-meter setback it's not feasible or it's not possible to be met. This development viability analysis takes into consideration many different factors and makes recommendations to mitigate any of the impacts that could be experienced due to the proximity of the rail line. So CP's comments are essentially, they've requested that all development on site be in accordance with their policies. Their policies say a 30-meter setback, but where that's not possible, this is the process, being the development viability analysis, to go through to essentially assess the proposal from an impact standpoint based on the proximity of the rail line. And then the findings of that report or that study would kind of, go from there in terms of comments from CP. This development viability analysis is to be developed in consultation with CP. So throughout the process, the applicant would need to be in discussions with the Canadian Pacific Railway as they're preparing this document.
Ms. Handley, I believe I saw your hand at some point. Did you want to add to the conversation some information?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to say that it is the decision of the municipality. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Douglas, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Mayor Coetzee. Just confirmation on this. Does this property not meet the 30, sorry, I missed that, the 30-meter setback from the rail?
Through the mayor to Councillor Douglas, no, the proposed dwelling is set back approximately 20 meters from the mutual property line. So the dwelling placement is about 10 meters short of complying with the 30-meter setback.
And just a follow-up question, if I may, the properties adjacent to that, beside it, are they at the same distance?
The adjacent dwellings are in approximately the same setback, if not a little less, to the rail line than what the proposed dwelling is.
I would be happy if, personally, just because I think everything is just so complicated and something this, well, anyways, if there was some sort of disclaimer put together that the township has no liability, should they approve this for without doing a report, I'd be happy to pass it today. Okay, I'm definitely sensing amongst members of council a desire to approve it today. And even though I respect that a couple of councilors say, well, we have to make sure the proper studies are done, they're not saying that because they plan on not approving in the future. So I sense, my sense is that council would love to approve this. So then the question is, what kind of resolution do we make that covers any liability risk? Because I think that's really the concern, if we need to do anything like that. And I'm looking towards our staff to, if they have any recommendations or can craft a resolution that would satisfy council and them. Anyone wish to speak to that? Councilor Bochek, in the meantime.
Question for clarity, Brad or Christopher, is this on a municipal road?
Through the mayor to Councilor Bochek, yes, it is on a municipally maintained road.
So how do we build a municipal road where we don't allow the setbacks in order to build a house on a lot that's a residential lot, zoned residential? If you build a road and you create a building lot and you can't build on it because you don't meet the setbacks to the property line, not to the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks are way far away from this. It's the property line. Do you think there was some mistakes made that maybe the road should have been moved further away from the track so these lots could be built on? I think this resident, this person who's wanting to develop has been put in a bad position here. And I see houses built 15, 20 feet away from railroad tracks all over the province. So for us as a council to hold up this is ridiculous. If we approve it and then the CP Rail arbitrates our approval and says, nope, we're not going to approve this, that's a different story. But as far as the zoning application goes or the amendment, I have no issues with that. So I feel that we should be moving ahead and passing this today. And if there's other problems that come up in the future with CP, they can deal with that themselves. We're looking at the township saying it's okay to develop within that area. I think everybody said that that's not an issue. So, I don't know, mountains and the molehills once again.
I think Councillor Wojcik, you have to recognize that when that street was built, it was long before this 30-meter setback existed.
The railroad tracks were still there.
Oh, yeah. But
So
the rule,
it's the same game, changing the rules halfway through the game, and our residents pay the price for it. I'm willing to go ahead and vote on this resolution today and pass it. But that's just my thoughts. Council can do what they want. And it's certainly based on the recommendations of our planning department. If they didn't want us to approve this, why did they bring it today? Why is it here? Why didn't everything happen before it came to us?
because we have to have a public meeting in these matters so the public can comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment.
Right. So if the CP Rail said that they recommend a vibration test, some sort of structural test, would that not be done before this comes to council for council to approve it?
Yeah, well, because it's not, in theory, technically, it's not here for our approval. It's here for the public to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cooper, followed by Mr. Espilla.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. You got to lower your hand and then hit your buttons and boy. Anyway, just a couple of quick things. I guess the comment about the road being in place and so on, it is certainly valid, but planning evolves. And that's what we're seeing here. Planning evolves. And so we have to deal with the plans that are in place today, not what happened 30 years ago. And I think we have to keep trying to remember that, even if it is cumbersome. The other thing I would say is I'd like an answer on this one, and that is that even if the owner holds as harmless, what if the building is built and it's sold? Where's the hold harmless after that? Can that be transferred from one owner to another? Because we need a hold harmless if we're going to be protected. Thank you.
Mr. Espilla.
Thank you, Mayor Kutsier. So the first issue I want to address is administration's not making a recommendation to deny the application at this point. Administration is recommending that we get additional information so that council can make a decision through our due process that we go through. As has been noted in this meeting, we're not making, it's not for making the decision today unless council chooses to do so. The recommendations that we have before us or the comments we have before us rather from the District of Municipality of Muskoka and from Canadian Pacific are suggesting that additional information be obtained. And I wholeheartedly support that we obtain that information before before council makes a decision on this matter. So I want to emphasize that we need more information before we can make a solid recommendation to council.
Councillor Jarvis.
Our director of planning just answered my question. So what I'm trying to do is to change the, I guess the approval such that we have recommend that this building proposal be accepted pending completion of the study recommended by the CP to their satisfaction. So once that's done, it's an automatic. Is there no way we can? I know, Brad, you've told them you need to come back, but if we give you the okay pending completion of the appropriate study, is that enough for you guys to move ahead on this so there are no further delays?
Councillor Spillo.
I'll take that. Through the mayor to Councillor Jarvis. I would recommend that we go through our approved process and follow through the preparation to Fern and follow through the preparation of the recommended studies before council makes a decision on this matter.
Okay, we have talked in circles numerous times. I'm going to read the resolution as it currently exists, and I'm going to call for the vote. And I think we have to move on because we're going in circles now. I have moved by Councillor Douglas, seconded by Councillor Hazelton. Be it resolved, the Development Service Report 2021-74 dated October 13th, 2021, with respect to zoning bylaw amendment application Z21-12 be received. And that staff be directed to consider the comments received for Z21-12 for 10 Fern Avenue, Mactier, and prepare a recommendation report and bylaw that will be brought back to a subsequent council meeting for consideration. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is passed. Thank you. Thank you very much. And to the applicants, we appreciate your patience. It's clear that council is in favor of this application, subject to the couple of conditions, including the impact study, be met. So I think at least the applicant knows where they stand in front of council. And with that, let's move on to our next application or next situation. That's with regards to Township of Georgian Bay housekeeping. And this is first to our planner, Mr. Oster.
Just going to bring up the presentation here. If I could get a thumbs up again if it's on screen. Perfect. Thank you.
We can see it. Thank you.
So our next public meeting is for zoning bylaw amendment Z21-13. This is a township initiated housekeeping amendment to correct a couple errors or omissions in Schedule A to the zoning bylaw, which is the zoning maps. So I do have a brief presentation here, essentially just going over the two properties where the corrections are proposed. So the first property here is 7280 Lake Joseph Road. This front portion of the lands here in the hatching are proposed to go from the open space to the highway commercial C3 zone. This is to correct an error or an omission. So in the previous zoning bylaw, being 1991-19, the lands were zoned, this portion at the front were zoned C3 or highway commercial. It appears that through the passing of zoning bylaw 2014-75, the C3 zone was removed from this portion of lands and were zoned open space inadvertently. There are no township records on file pertaining to a deliberate downzoning of the property. So we do believe that it is a mapping error and are recommending that it be corrected through this bylaw back to the C3 or the highway commercial zone. And the second property that is proposed to be corrected here, this one is a mapping error. So this portion, this is the Middleton subdivision and the portion of the development that is located within the settlement area of MacTier. So previously zoning bylaw amendment bylaw 2009-80 was passed. That rezoned the waterfront lots of this portion of the development to an R1 exception zone that implemented recommendations and mitigation measures that were recommended through environmental studies that were prepared for the plan of subdivision development. Due to the parcel fabric at the time, the R1 zone, the R4 exception 1 zone was not applied to this portion of land. So through this proposed housekeeping correction, the R4 exception 1 zone that is applied to these waterfront lots would also be applied to these waterfront lots. So this is just a correction to make sure that the appropriate zoning category and those site-specific requirements are included on all of the waterfront lots of this portion of the development. So just a brief summary of what we just discussed. So the C3 zoning correcting on the Lake Joseph Road property, and for the Middleton subdivision, correcting the zoning to make sure that those recommendations from the environmental studies are implemented and are addressed at the building permit stage for those lots. So staff do not have any concerns with the proposal here. We've reviewed the files and everything on record at the township. And we are recommending that council pass the bylaw to correct those errors or omissions through this housekeeping. So that concludes my presentation. If council has any questions, I would be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To our clerk, was there any correspondence on file in regard to this housekeeping application, if I can call it that?
So at least one letter of no objection was received from the District of Muskoka.
And are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this, these housekeeping amendments?
There were 2 members of the public, the property owner for each of the properties who registered to attend, but I don't see that they've raised their hands.
Okay, but if they do, let us know. But in the meantime, I'll turn it over to council. And I saw Councillor Jarvis' hand go up, followed by Councillor Cooper, please.
I keep moving things around here on the screen. Yeah, I have no objection to any of these. I think both of them are quite legitimate and logical. I just have a question out of curiosity for Brad on the Lake Joseph application or the sort of land correction, designation correction. There's still a hunk of land I'll say to the west of that piece that you're rezoning. Is that owned by the same people as all the other property there, or is that our property? So a little like the 1/3 section up in that upper, sort of the northwest corner of that lot.
I'm just going to bring the presentation back up so we can make sure we're talking about the same piece.
Yeah.
So was it?
No, it's a Lake Joseph. Yeah, that one.
This portion.
Yeah.
So right now, this thick black outline is the boundaries of the property, and it's just this portion of land in the hatching that's proposed to be corrected.
So, but is the land immediately adjacent to that hatching? So who owns that?
I believe it's privately owned lands.
So it's not part of the property we're looking at all.
No.
Okay. That's the first question. And the second is really an observation with regards to the other application or other correction you're making, Brad. And I just based on what we saw with the earlier application, how close are these lands to the railway line? Just a interesting question.
Yeah, so these lands, This here is the rail right of way,
Yeah.
this property here.
And Fern
so-
is right there, and Fern Avenue, which is the earlier application, is right there as well.
Correct. So through the plan of subdivision application, CP rail would have been circulated. There would have been requirements to have
Sure.
the dwelling setback the full 30 meters. And due to the depth of these lots, that 30 meters could be accommodated.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There's
Gotcha.
also clauses in the subdivision agreement
Okay.
related to the rail lands.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Kutzier, and thank you, Brad. Just a quick comment. There were 3 applications here, and I'm not trying to flog a horse here, other than just to for future knowledge of our council. Could you explain what transpired with the second application that came forward, just so that we are aware of aggregating land together when they're actually separate properties and frankly, in high water, pieces of land that are separated. I think the takeaway was on the second application that aggregating 2 pieces of separate property isn't allowable. So could you sort of explain?
If I may, Councillor Cooper, that's not part of what's in front of us. So allow Mr. Oster to address why it's not in front of us, but not get into any of the depth or detail as to the analysis, because that is not what we're talking about today.
So here, if I may, then perhaps we can have an education session at another time so we learn from this. Thank you.
So through the mayor to Councillor Cooper, the other property that was included on the notice that was subsequently pulled from this meeting, a survey was found on file at the township. So staff want the opportunity to review the survey and make sure that the minimum lot sizes are taken into consideration before a recommendation comes from staff on whether or not the land should be corrected in terms of their zoning from the NSI zone.
Okay, so more work's involved, and I'm sure that includes high water amongst other measures.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions with regards to the applications? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Mayor Coetzee. Brett, I'm just wondering if you could just confirm to me that with this Middleton property that is being looked at here, was there any correspondence from the owner? You may have said that and I missed it, sorry.
No, sorry. So through the mayor to Councillor Douglas, staff did reach out to the property owners of both of these properties to discuss the proposed housekeeping, and the property owner for both properties have advised that they had no objection to their corrections.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other comments? What I have in front of me is moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Wienko. Be it resolved that Development Services Report 2021-75 dated October 13th, 2021, with respect to zoning bylaw amendment application Z21-13 be received. And that council enacts bylaw 2021-068, being a housekeeping bylaw for 7280 Lake Joseph Road and a portion of Middleton subdivision S 2005-6, being part lot 2, concession 8, being lots 8 to 18 on plan 35M-752, to correct errors and omissions. All those in favor? And that is carried, it appears unanimously. Thank you very much. And that ends the Planning Act public meeting portion of our programming today. So the next item is plan applications not subject to a public meeting. And we have Development Service Report, Waterfront Study Report 2021-81 with regards to draft waterfront policy review terms of reference.
We just need Mr. Farragon from JLR to be let in, as this is his report.
I was just looking it up, and yes, that's what it has in my agenda. In the meantime, I will just thank all the attendees who are interested in the prior applications for attending, and we appreciate their interest. And I see Mr. Farragon has joined us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Very happy to be here with you this morning and have the opportunity to take the next step with you in the drafting of the terms of reference for what we're describing as the waterfront policy review. So I'll begin by apologizing in advance. I have not prepared a presentation for council's for the discussion that we're going to have today, because I believe it's the report is available, and I wanted to sort of get your feedback on the report. But council will recall, as we've described in the report, in April of this year, council passed a resolution directing staff to undertake the preparation of a terms of reference for a waterfront policy review. And since that time, we've been working closely with Ms. Gunby, Mr. Oster, colleagues at Hutchinson Environmental Services, as well as colleagues at Garrett Pickfield and your planning committee as well, to develop the terms of reference that you have before you this morning. So the report that is before you sets some context in response to the resolution that you have passed in April, and describes some key changes that have occurred both at the local, the regional and the provincial level, which would necessitate the need for a waterfront policy review. And then importantly, in terms of the terms of reference themselves, what we're proposing in that document is to undertake the review in 2 phases. So the first phase would be what I'm describing, or what the team is describing, excuse me, as an understanding phase. So what we would do is go out, conduct research, consult with the community to understand the issues that exist within the waterfront areas of your communities. And by waterfront areas, I mean, of course, the islands, the coast, and our inland waterways. And then through that understanding and the communication phase, come back to council in the spring of next year with a list of both issues, opportunities, and constraints for planning within those areas of your community, as well as possible solutions to those. And as we describe in the report, what we envisage at this point in time is at the end of that first phase of work, as we look into that first and early second quarter of next year, once we have a more fulsome understanding of the issues that are in play, and we'll be able to sort of divide, if you will, the improvements to both policy and regulation into short and long-term improvements. So short-term improvements are something that we envisage right now as things that can be addressed within sort of this mandate of council. So within 2022, certainly before July of 2022. And then longer term improvements that may require more study and more analysis prior to coming back to council with, you know, the information that is required for council to make informed choices about its long-term planning policy framework. The terms of reference as well, there is a paragraph that our colleagues from Hutchinson Environmental Services have included in that, where they're proposing to undertake some additional research and review to ensure that the factual information that we have on the various natural heritage systems within the municipality are up to date. And so that information base, if you will, is strong. So we can make different choices for policy sort of moving forward. Now, the terms of reference that you have before you this morning were shared with Planning Committee at its meeting a couple of weeks ago. And we had a great discussion with committee about some of the planning issues that you continue to experience. We got some great feedback on the terms of reference. And so some of the feedback that we were able to incorporate in the terms of reference has, so a good example of that is we had received some feedback that sort of description of your existing policy framework should have been in that document. So we've made changes like that. And also in the report, you'll see a section where we have summarized the feedback that we had received from Planning Committee. And as you'll sort of see from that feedback, Planning Committee has some really great insights into planning within your communities. They've made some really great suggestions for improvement. And if I had to summarize the feedback from committee, it would be to sort of say, you know, this is a great initiative. We want to make sure that we get it right. They were encouraging us to scope the review on sort of, you know, the sort of key issues that you're sort of facing today to ensure that we could bring recommendations forward for council's consideration within that first and second quarter of next year. And of course, continue to encourage us to focus on continuous process improvement and looking at broader cottage country development trends to ensure that this review is focused and informed by those trends as well. So with that, Mr. Mayor, we're here to get council's feedback on the terms of reference. I'm happy to answer any questions. In terms of next steps, based on the feedback that we received today, our intent is to go back and to further refine the terms of reference, and then to bring that back to council for consideration at its next meeting, and hopefully direction at that time as well. So happy to take any feedback that council has of me, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask one question before I turn it over to council, just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding, and I'm going to use a slightly different wording, and you may tell me that my wording's inappropriate, so that's why I'm asking. I see this as a two-pronged approach, and the first one is what I think of more as housekeeping, in the sense that if you find some inconsistencies or difficulties that we can clear up, you know, next year, that we'll do that. But I think the longer term is more or less doing some of the homework for next term of council, who may choose, that's up to them, but they may choose to do an official plan review or something, depending upon what information you're able to collect in the second part of this. So that, if you will, the short term is for this council, the long term is actually homework for next term.
So to you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. Thank you for that.
Thank you. With that, council, who would like to comment on this report and add to it? Councillor Bocek, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jason, for your presentation. I have quite a few questions after reading through the draft of the terms of reference, but I'm just going to start with one, and then I'm going to let other councillors continue on because they may have similar questions. So my first question is your source of information for what we've got in front of us today. You said you had a lot of consultation with the planning staff, I should say the planning committee, and obviously with our staff. My question is, by reading the terms of reference, there seems to be some very particular items in there. I'm just wondering, was there any consultation with any members of the council?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bocek, so the answer is no, not up until this point. So this meeting is the first opportunity to sort of check in with council on this.
Good. Then I think you've done a good job with your homework as far as referencing things in your terms of reference. And obviously the planning committee did a fairly good job in relaying what the councillors had brought to their attention. So I commend you for that work. I don't necessarily agree with the draft that's in front of us, but that certainly work itself out through time, and I'm sure we'll come to some sort of final document that'll be very useful to everyone within the township, not only this sitting council, but the next council that comes in next October. So thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor Rienko, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. And Jason, I thought your report was really very good, and I like to see the steps that are being taken, and hopefully we can address some of the specifics before we leave it too far into the future. So that would be one comment. But I just wanted to say overall, I think it's really quite good. I just wanted to suggest that perhaps, I'm not sure who has this document, but have you had a chance to review the ward boundary review that was conducted for the township of Georgian Bay? And the reason I ask that question is that one of the things that the ward boundary review did was assess the area that we're talking about here. And there's some pretty good descriptors in there that I think might be helpful. The expert that worked on actually cleaned up the ward boundary review that was underway. A new expert was brought in, and one of the things that was identified was that there are a number of communities of interest. And some of the descriptions I'm seeing in this paragraph under context, it talks about wilderness, rural lands, and later on and further down, you talk about certain communities of interest. But I think in the 10,000 foot area, I think if you read what was described in the ward boundary review, it might give you a little bit more sort of depth in terms of what those communities of interest are. And so I just a suggestion for you. And I would ask that either our clerk or our CAO forward you that document for some more context. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Rienko.
Thank you. Jason, your initial understanding of this project, or your initial scope of this project, do you feel that it encompasses all the shorelines within our township? So it's basically, we're not just picking certain locations or certain shorelines, but you're looking at all shorelines in our township. And the second half of that is, are you looking at all issues that could relate to the waterfront? In other words, building sizes, sizes of bunkies, locations of bunkies, docks, patios, and all that. So is your thoughts of all encompassing, or is it specific, saying, okay, we'll go look at these key areas, these key shorelines in our township, and these key issues within those areas? And I have another question too, if I get a chance to ask you.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly appreciate the question. And so I think there are two parts to the answer. So at this point in time, yes, we envisage the study applying to all waterfront areas within the township, as we've described in the report. As we move through the process, our focus may change. We may pay attention to some areas more than others, depending upon the feedback that we receive from the community or the information that we uncover either through the research or the consultation that we're going to undertake. And then the second part of the answer to the question is similar to the first, in the sense that the terms of reference that you have before you this morning explain a process, and it's a process of understanding and discovery. So as we're having a discussion today, we understand that there are certain issues that exist within the township that people are interested to address. So a good example of that would be coming from our discussion with Planning Committee. The definitions and the regulations relating to docks would be a good example of that. So at this point in time, that question is part of the scope for the study for sure. As we move through the conversation together, there may be new issues that come to light that we'll have to include in the scope. And so the process of research and consultation in the first phase that we're proposing is designed to get all of those issues on the table, if you will, so we could look at them and council could give us direction in terms of those issues, which are most important to address at this time. So the one part, the terms of reference don't adequately describe, I'm just realizing, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, is, we'll go subject to your feedback today, we're going to obviously update everything and bring it back to you, but that won't be the last point in the conversation with council. We actually envisage checking in with you regularly to provide you with updates on both the study process and what we're learning. So there may be opportunities between November and sort of Q2 of 2022 to get some additional feedback and some additional direction from council to ensure that the study meets council's expectations. So hopefully that answers the question.
Can I ask my second question now, or should I wait?
Yes.
Okay, the other issue I have is that you realize that we have a number of community plans throughout the Georgian Bay and on the inland to 6 Mile Lake. Is this an opportunity for those associations to modify their community plans? I guess that's the first question. And is there an impetus to try to amalgamate some of these community plans so they're not standalones anymore, but kind of amalgamate them into, you know, good ideas and so on, all applied to across all the townships and so on. So in other words, some people say we should get rid of community plans by amalgamating all the good stuff into our planning policies, or keep them separately and add to them. What's your feelings there that way?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the question. It's going to be hard for me to provide a definitive answer at this point, because the process will help us sort of understand what the right approach will be to take with respect to those questions. But I would go back to, in the report, we attempted to address this, where we said that the intent was to look at the policies while still maintaining the unique nature of the various waterfront communities that do exist within the township. And I would go back to what the mayor had indicated earlier in terms of expectations for at least the short-term recommendations, which would be to address the various housekeeping matters that are uncovered through the understanding stage. So some of the questions that you raised, Councillor, are good questions. They will certainly come up throughout this process. By the time we get to the end of it, we'll have a better answer. But I suspect, you know, knowing policy the way that I do, and knowing the history of planning within your community as I do today, I would suspect that some of the issues that you're raising are more long-term policy considerations for the next council to consider, if at all.
All right, thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, I appreciate the report. It's extensive and you know, is a good read. But I kept coming back to the first part of the draft terms of reference and stumbling over the 4 items, or at least a couple of them anyway. And I'm wondering if there's any way we can sort of clarify within this process those 4 basic tenets of waterfront designation, Jason, because at some points it's saying that certain lands would be considered, generally speaking, part of waterfront, would have waterfront designation, yet there are exceptions. And I can understand that there'll be exceptions, but I worry that those exceptions would be a conflict to a certain degree. I mean, for instance, if you have an urban center like the Village of Honey Harbor or McTier, which have direct waterfront, and Port Severn also too, they have direct waterfront, yet you're saying that within the urban center, the waterfront designation basically doesn't apply yet. There's certain reasons where we may want it to apply within those designated areas, because waterfront designation implies to me a certain level of protection to the environment that you wouldn't get if you didn't have that designation within an urban center. And I'm concerned about that part of it. I don't know if we need to sort of clear up those defining points, or just provide clarity for them a little bit later on in the documentation.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly appreciate the comment, and this is exactly why we're here, is to take this sort of feedback. If there is a desire for council to include the sort of waterfront areas in the urban area, then we're happy to take that direction and make sure that that's included within the definition of the study area, and subsequently the scope of the analysis itself. So happy to receive that feedback if that's what the direction council wants to give us this morning.
Just to follow up to that, I would encourage council, from my perspective, that we should be looking at that, because everything else we do would be somewhat moot if we don't include urban areas to the same degree of research, because they could have a direct effect on water bodies that obviously waterfront designated areas would communities or designated waterfront areas would not. So I think we've got to be careful there.
All right. Councillors Hazelton or Douglas, do you want to provide some feedback before I start the second round with Councillor Wojcik?
Sure.
Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you, Jason, for your information, your report. I think that you've done had a good start here. I would echo Councillor Jarvis's comments about the so-called urban areas. If you look at the Honey Harbor area, we've got the Honey Harbor non-waterfront area. I don't know what the right label is, but we've got Honey Harbor Waterfront. And in fairness, the differences between those two are very, very few. The only real difference is there are a scattering of marinas and a trailer park in the core hamlet-like area. But there is a lot of waterfront property that is in that non-waterfront designation that you may want to look at. And we have seen recent examples where the neighbors have been concerned about not being under that waterfront designation and having the protections and considerations of that waterfront designation because they're on the other side of a stream or the other side of a very narrow bay or whatever. So that's one comment I'd put out there and ask you if you could look into that. So when somebody is taking a run at matters like this, you can kind of take a research-oriented approach, and that's really what I see the path you're taking. And I know you've heard me say this before, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think it's relevant. All of council seemed to be very focused on trying to find a way to reduce our costs, legal costs, in all the challenges we've had at LPAT and Land Planning Council, and whatever you want to call it. And these are decisions that have been made by the Committee of Adjustment and Planning Council. And so it occurs to me that one path you may want to consider is to go and look at the last, 8-10 examples of where Committee of Adjustment and Planning Council have made a decision that is not in sync with what the planning recommendation was, and the township has lost at LPAT. And I heard an enormous amount of emotion from lots of councillors saying this has to stop. We've got to find a way to close the gap between what planning recommends and what Committee of Adjustment and Planning Council decides. And so I would suggest that there is a parallel path here in your research that could take those examples of where we have lost at LPAT as a township and consider those as examples that may be, call it low-hanging fruit of matters that could be addressed sooner than later, because in our previous conversations, those seem to be the topics that everybody was emotionally upset about, and we wanted to find fairly quickly a path to solve those kinds of problems. So I don't want you to stop at those. I like what you've done with the broader scope here, but I think a mix of the two might provide you and us with the most effective path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, do you want to say something before we give it over to Councillor Bocek?
Thanks, Mayor Coetzee. I think a lot of this has already been covered, so there's not really a lot for me to add to this, other than to say that I think part of the path, as Councillor Hazelton has just brought up, I just want to concur with him that I think that's a really good place to take a look, is where our planning staff has made one decision and our Committee of Adjustment has made a different decision, and that has resulted in some big legal fees. That should be a fairly good clue to look at as just one area. But aside from that, I would just like to say thank you so much for this report, because it's a fantastic beginning to covering a lot of areas that we want to look at. And I'm looking forward to refining it as we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bocek, you've been patient. Your turn now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Jason, my next statements are basically coming from my ward, which is Ward 3, which is the hamlet of Port Severn, going north to 6 Mile Lake. Our community here is probably more diverse than any other community within the township, being that, well, I'll give you an example. Little Lake and Gloucester Pool, which is the largest inland body of water we have in our township, is made up of 2 townships. It's made up of Severn Township, which encompasses about 70% of the lake, and then Georgian Bay Township is the remainder. And of course, on this lake, you have 2 completely different planning approaches, one from Severn and one from Georgian Bay. And you could have neighbors that are dealing with very different rules and regulations. I'll add that the Severn River, which is a part of my ward, I have people with neighbors in the Muskoka Lakes right next door, and we have people in Severn Township right next door to them, or on the other side of the river. The comments I've received from the Severn River group, from the Gloucester Pool Cottage Association, they're quite happy with the planning laws, the bylaws and everything that are in place today in the official plan. They're not looking for any amendments. They're not looking for any tightening of ambiguity or any rules. If anything, they're looking the opposite direction. They're looking at, we have such tight standards in our planning department, where Severn Township across the way, they're allowed to do what they want. There's no dock permit needed. There's no ramp permit needed. There's no shore platform permit needed. That's all encompassed in the M&RF. So when you're looking at the township as a whole, and this goes for the Moore Point people too, which are on Georgian Bay, they're quite satisfied with the official plan the way it is right now. So we have 2 differences in opinion here in the township of Georgian Bay. One opinion is really get this official plan, sorted out, tightened away, make it so that we're not constantly losing when we're being challenged. But at the same time, we have a very big demographic here that is not in favor of what we're looking at doing here. And this is not an opinion of mine. This is basically what the residents of this township are looking at. And when I bring up the fact that we're going to do a review and maybe tighten some things up and make sure that we're not wasting money, they want no part of it. They go, we already have too many rules. Our neighbors get to do what they want. We're locked down. So please, in this process, if you could look at and get an understanding of what the township of Georgian Bay really consists of. And we have very unique communities. And I've listened to the people of Cognishine, which is another community in our township, and they are very for tightening up restrictions, getting rid of the shells and shell knots, and making it more solid so that they don't find themselves at LPAT every time it comes forward. So it's going to be a real challenge to yourself and to the people with Mr. Pickford, but understanding our township is vitally important, and that this exercise that we're doing right now perhaps is very effective for a lot of our communities, but not wanted by a number of communities in our township. This is the feeling that I've gotten. And if you could take those words and just remember in the back of your head that anything that we do in the way of friendly amendments or housekeeping may work for some of the communities quite well, but maybe not some of the other communities, such as in Ward 3 here. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Kutzier, and I'll be very brief, Jason. I just wanted to, I support what Councillor Bocek is referring to, and there are some differences, of course, and that's part of what I think the process is here anyway. And we need to respect those differences. But on top of which, I wanted to say that in terms of the comments that came from Councillor Jarvis and Hazelton with respect to certain communities, waterfront communities like Honey Harbor, there are a number of adjacencies in that community. And so to to sort of have a broad brush and say we may not do much of that community in terms of our waterfront oversight, I think would be really unfortunate because all those waters are adjacent to a lot of residential locations. So we could have, sort of commercial areas, but the water is the water. So we want to make sure our environment is protected, and it's number one on our hit parade in terms of strategy. So I just wanted to encourage that. Also, in terms of the sort of second phase of this, the only thing I would suggest is that maybe some work could be done on some of the lowest hanging fruit, I think was referred to by Councillor Hazelton. There may be 3 or 4 items that we can start dealing with before the next election. I really would hope we aren't punting everything to after December of 2022. So there's some fairly big items that maybe should be at least started to be dealt with, if not actually dealt with in the next few months. So that's my other comment is let's not punt too much. Thanks.
Anyone else at this point? I think we all greatly appreciate all the work that's been done. I think Mr. Farragon gets an appreciation of the, I'll call it the complexity of our township, and the challenges that presents to planners. I think it's very good to have fresh eyes looking at our official plan and zoning bylaw to see if there are inconsistencies in it. And I fully agree with, or not, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I share Councillor Bochek's concerns that I don't think this should be in a way perceived as tightening the rules as much as making the rules more understandable and more efficient to exercise, with an appreciation that in some areas we're going to want the rules to be, let me call it, stricter than in other areas because of the great variety we have here. We can't expect a lot size in Honey Harbor, downtown Honey Harbor, to match a lot size in Wawatasi. That's just not realistic. And so I think that we have to appreciate that we have a lot of different areas. And I think Councillor Bochek's comments about when you're on water bodies where 2 or 3 municipalities affect that water body, you can, the differences between municipalities are very visible. Council, what I have in front of me is a motion moved by Councillor Bochek, seconded by Councillor Douglas. Be it resolved that the Development Service Report dated October 5th, 2021 from the Township Planning Consultant regarding draft waterfront policy review terms of reference be received for information and discussion. All those, Councillor Bochek.
Just in your remarks there, Mr. Mayor, it brought something to my attention that I wanted to address with Jason. Was within our township, we have district roads, District of Muskoka controlled roads, where the setbacks, the frontages and everything are completely different than the township of Georgian Bays. And some of those properties on those district roads are also waterfront area properties. So that's something I think that also going to have to be looked at. Certainly, and the fact that some of these properties are on services, so that their frontages and lot coverages are different than the ones that are not on municipal services. Very key when we're writing this stuff that we take those into consideration as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And I'm going to say moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Hazelton. Be it resolved that Planning Council adopts bylaw 2021-069 to confirm the proceedings of the October 13th, 2021 council meeting. All those in favor? And that is carried. Moved by Councillor Cooper, second by Councillor Hazelton again. Be it resolved that Planning Council does now adjourn at 10:37 a.m. until November 9th, 2021 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And that is carried. And we're now adjourned until, and we'll meet again for a committee of the whole meeting at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Until then, thank you very much.